The Denver Broncos get their sleigh bells rocked against the Los Angeles Rams on Christmas Day. Russell Wilson turned in an awful performance in his return under center at the quarterback position. On top of that, the Broncos defense surprisingly struggled as well. Not to mention, what are some of the bright spots, if any? It features a prominent playmaker like Jerry Jeudy. You get that and much more in today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos. What's up, Broncos country? Merry Christmas. Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, a barn burner, so to speak, here as the Broncos receive coal in their stocking thanks to the Los Angeles Rams, Baker Mayfield, Tyler Higbee, and Cam Akers' efforts on the day from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter from Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by my good friend and co-host, Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. Sayre, first off, I just want to start this show off by saying to everybody in Broncos country, I'm sure you and I feel the same way, we apologize for all of us and all of you for having to sit through something like that. Just one of the most embarrassing losses, I'd say, in Broncos history, Sayre, dating back to what we saw with the 54-10 blowout by the Raiders in 2010 at Empire Field of Mile High, Invesco Field of Mile High, whatever you want to call it these days. It was just an overall disappointing game from the Broncos. They got smacked in the mouth from the onset. Some of the things we came into this week excited about, some potential matchups and storylines, didn't even get a chance to play their head in this game as the Broncos lose in embarrassing fashion 51-14 to Baker Mayfield and the Los Angeles Rams, who seemingly did whatever they wanted to the Denver Broncos.
They did, Cody. I feel like, a lump of coal. What else would have been preferable than this? As for Broncos fans on Christmas Day, man, it's brutal. You know, it makes you embarrassed, like you said, to even really associate with the team. Like I was telling you right when we logged on to record today, I'm like, man, I had to watch that game in front of my family. You know, it's just a terrible feeling, right? It's a terrible feeling for the team to look this bad, to look this helpless and hopeless. And you're right, like we came into this week maybe even hopeful for some positive things from this team. I know they were 4-10 going into the game, obviously 4-11 now, but you certainly expected better after the way they played last week, the way they finished against the Kansas City Chiefs. Things were trending in a completely different direction, but then you go into Los Angeles and get absolutely destroyed. And this is with the Broncos are the healthier team. Baker Mayfield has been running Sean McVay's offense for the, 3 weeks or whatever it's been at this point. And I just can't believe that the Broncos could come out looking this bad, this flat, this completely. There's so much to dive into in this game, Cody, but I think obviously Russell Wilson from the start of this game, he was the catalyst in the negative fashion, right? He threw the interception on the first two possessions that he had there, one of them to his former teammate, Bobby Wagner. It was it was really, really bad from the start. Russ looking rusty, for lack of a better term. He was not looking good out there at all. And it was more of kind of the same we've seen from the offense, although for the most part this season, haven't really seen them turning the ball over at this high of a rate. Now you come out against a team like Los Angeles that's really struggled to turn the ball over all year, really struggled to run the ball all year, really struggled to find any offensive efficiency all year, doesn't have their best players out there, and you get hung 50 points on in this game.
I mean, that's so frustrating. There's so many things about this game that were just like, man, we had to suffer on Christmas Day for all this. Like I think we all had better things to do. I didn't go to this game, and I feel for all the media people who, obviously left and went to this game, had their flights delayed, canceled, and had to get to LA last minute to see a performance like this. Is like, man, was it even worth it at that point here? But, going back to Russell Wilson, I mean, Sayre, I think there are some legitimate concerns to be had now about this. And Boomer Esiason said something interesting on the post-game report on CBS for those that watched it there. He mentioned something that, the owners have enough money. If they want to get out of this contract, they may just put the money up to do just that. But Wilson's return was a massive disappointment for this team. And obviously they waved the white flag a little bit in the fourth quarter, being down such a massive deficit. Brett Rippett came in, moved the ball a little bit, then threw a pick six, 85 yards, and made the score 51-14 at that point there. But, for Russell Wilson, 3 interceptions on the day, and each of them were awful interceptions, poor decisions, not being smart with the football. I mean, it's to the point when you go on the broadcast, you see Cortland Sutton like adamant, jumping up and down, like, just don't throw that, like run for the first time. Because if Russ would have kept it on that 3rd interception to Jalen Ramsey, he would have been able to pick up the first down with his legs. His decision-making has been mind-boggling, and also to the point where he does struggle to make decisions, to the tune of holding onto the football too long, which led to 6 total sacks on the day. I mean, Sayre, this whole Russell Wilson thing, when we go back, how excited I think we were saying, okay, we get to cover a team with a franchise quarterback now with Russell Wilson, versus now it's like, gosh, can the Broncos get out of the Russell Wilson contract in any way, shape, or form at this point? It's a rough time right now in Broncos country. And Sayre, I have no idea what the Broncos can do that's going to put them in the right direction at this point in time. If they stick with Russ, I mean, so far what we've seen may not be something that helps them get on track, and therefore may not pan out.
I know, it's such a weird place to be, isn't it? We didn't think at any level that we'd be sitting here discussing this, especially late in the season. I think we all thought it would be more so playoffs and whether or not the Broncos were going to be able to go into Kansas City and get a victory en route to the playoffs, right? So it's a really weird thing to have to be discussing. How the heck can you get out of a $124 million investment? Because that's really the Broncos. I know the contract looks way bigger on paper. That's what the Broncos gave in fully guaranteed money, and the rest of his guaranteed money is a trigger based on whether or not he's on the roster. So it's $124 million completely guaranteed. So no matter what happens, you're giving him $124 million. And I think that what's fascinating about this whole discussion, Cody, is I don't know what you do. I think that's the problem, right? It's like you don't have a high first round pick. So it's not like you can say, well, we'll just draft somebody. You don't have very many options in free agency that you could legitimately turn to say, well, here's a guy that really we could build around, or anything like that. You don't have a ton of trade assets right now. I mean, you could look to the future. So I don't even know where that discussion begins is got me frazzled, to even start thinking like that. So I don't know. I personally, even though in the heat of the moment, I obviously want to be on the same line of like with everybody else of saying like, look, let's see how we can get rid of Russell Wilson. I think long-term, giving him another year, that's what the Broncos are going to ultimately have to do with the kind of investment that you made. You're just going to have to figure out the things and the pieces around him. Although, I mean, like you mentioned, the ownership right now in Denver, I mean, they cannot be happy with what's going on. They have to be just as embarrassed, if not more so than everyone else. Like, think about us at our Christmas, with our families, watching this game with our families feeling so embarrassed. Think about the people who paid $4.65 billion to own the team, right? You are the representatives of the team. So this is cutting deep. I mean, this is a deep cutting loss. This is a deep cutting type of season. And Russell Wilson is at the center of it all. Like, he is going to bear a ton of responsibility. I think what that looks like is going to be maybe the most fascinating question of the offseason. And unfortunately, it's going to keep our Denver Broncos in the national media microscope.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting what happens. I think even in the next 24 hours, Sayre, especially considering that the Broncos move on from Nathaniel Hackett, they do have the opportunity to get a head start on interviewing potential head coaching candidates as early as maybe later this week. But so much to ponder. This is just an embarrassing performance, an embarrassing loss. And really, when we think that things can't get worse, Sayre, they somehow find a way. Like, it's unimaginable how the season has gone. And certainly we feel for everybody in Broncos country. As we mentioned, it was painful for us to have to sit and write a game recap about this performance on Sunday, on Christmas Day, with family gathered all around. And I'm sure it was the same for you that had to watch it at home. So Broncos country, our well wishes are with you. This has definitely been a frustrating season from a coverage standpoint. Considering the expectations for this team were very high. Outside of that, the Broncos defense turned in a very surprisingly defensive performance that was massively disappointing considering some of the circumstances. We'll dive into the defensive struggles in Sunday's loss to the Los Angeles Rams. We'll get to that on today's episode Locked On Broncos. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends at Prize Picks. And Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports done right. With the Prize Picks app, you choose 2 to 5 players that you're focused on heading into the week. These players, they'll have a projection that's set by Prize Picks, and you simply choose whether or not they'll have more or less than the Prize Picks projection, which could allow you to win 10 times your money on any entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports, and first-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. The Denver Broncos defense struggled in a massive way in Sunday's 51-14 loss on the road Christmas Day against the Los Angeles Rams. Thank you so much, Broncos country, for tuning in despite this disappointing season, making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Sayre and I, we have you covered every step of the way, every day, all year long, throughout the entire offseason, throughout OTAs, training camp, the season. You get all that here. Locked On Broncos on your favorite audio podcasting platform, or whether you watch on YouTube. We just want to say thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen or to watch us break down all things orange and blue. Let's strategize here, Broncos country. I mean, this is what the show is all about. Let's find a way to use this as a means of therapy. What solutions do you have for this Broncos team? We're always encouraged to hear what you have to say. Drop your comments down below if you're watching on YouTube, or tweet us on Twitter at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos. Sayre, I think, obviously we know that the offense has struggled massively this season. I think we expected more out of the offense, but I think what was more surprising about this game, and in particular about this loss, was how bad the Broncos defense struggled in Sunday's loss. I mean, Sayre, they allowed 31 points in the first half, 261 total yards, and they allowed the Rams to go 5 of 6 on third down in the first half. I mean, Denver simply could not get out the field. They couldn't get a stop. Baker Mayfield, Tyler Higbee, Cam Akers, they just tore up the Broncos defense with chunk plays, and Denver seemingly didn't have an answer for them. It was the first time I felt like Jerry Jeudy's defense was just simply outmanned, and it's so odd considering Denver's personnel.
Right, exactly. And I think that we've not seen this much this season. I remember talking on the crossover Thursday episode during the week about, the Broncos have been really good against the run most of the year, with a couple of outliers, right? Like, you'll have the dominant game like we saw against the Titans and Derrick Henry, but then you'll have the games like we've seen against the Raiders and Josh Jacobs. This was one of those types of games. And not to say that Draymond Jones is the cure-all, but obviously not having him up front, it affects your defensive line quite a bit. We did not see that in the previous week against the Arizona Cardinals all that much, but the Rams really exploited that. And I think Sean McVay kind of flexed in this game, just the way that he is able to maneuver in terms of the chess match of football, because Baker Mayfield made some nice downfield throws, but the run was setting up the pass in this game. I mean, they were running all over the Broncos defense. They were able to hit Tyler Higbee off those play action fakes. They were able to hit some shot plays because they had favorable third down situations, had the pass rush kind of off their guard, and then in the red zone, they were able to convert. We have not seen that from the Broncos defense all year. It was kind of like, I know Sean McVay is very familiar with Ejiro Evero, Broncos defensive coordinator, but man, it was kind of like he was like, all right, I know Evero's going to run this defense right here, so let's run this play. And it worked almost the entire game, right? They scored on their first 6 or 7 possessions of the game, and it was just, one thing after the next. And it wasn't just field goals. The Broncos have given up plenty of field goals this year. They tighten up in the red zone. We did not see that in this game against the Rams. I know that the 51 points, it's not all on the defense, but the majority of it is. And the defense really, you can't say any one area of the team let the team down in this game. So I'm not going to use that verbiage, but the defense was a letdown in this particular matchup, obviously.
The Rams had 26 total first downs in this game. They were 6 of 10 on third down. Finished the game with 388 total yards. But, you mentioned guys like Cam Akers. Sayre, this is a guy who just seemingly did whatever he wanted. 3 rushing touchdowns on the day defensively. Now, granted, majority of them were from 2 or 3 yards. I think he had a 9-yard rushing touchdown, but he just gashed the Broncos defense methodically, right? And so when it forced the Broncos to tighten up, as you mentioned, the play action stuff with Baker Mayfield came forth. Baker Mayfield went 24 of 28 passing in this game, 230 yards and 2 touchdowns. They pulled him in the fourth quarter because the Broncos were down by such a massive deficit. Mayfield was dishing and diming in this thing to the tune where, when you have a complementary style like that, Sayre, I think you said it perfectly. This is something that the Broncos, what the Rams did in this game in particular, is something that the Broncos should have done from a play calling standpoint, from an offensive emphasis standpoint from the very beginning. What have we seen? Like the last couple of weeks, we saw the run set up the pass for the Broncos. And, you had Latavius Murray going a little bit earlier. He only had 8 total carries in this game. Now, granted, Denver found themselves down 17-0 early on. So when you're down 17-0, you know what makes sense? That you don't run the football, because if you want to try to climb back in, running the football means you're running a lot of time off the clock. So I understand that in this situation here, but Denver still is very pass happy to the point we talked about it. Russell Wilson being sacked a total number of 6 times there. This game had all the drama you can think of. And realistically, when he started off the game with those 2 interceptions, what is Russell Wilson looking at? Like, what is he doing? He's trying to do way too much and is putting the Broncos defense in a situation, right? So I think like those first 2 touchdowns that the Rams scored, I thought to myself, like, all right, this isn't necessarily on the defense. Granted, they got to get a stop at some point, but they had a short field position. But then from that point, it's like the floodgates open. After those first 2 touchdowns, Denver seemingly could not do anything to slow down Akers. And then Tyler Higbee, a guy who, isn't the greatest tight end in the NFL, but man, was he so reliable in Sean McVay's offensive scheme. He had 11 targets on the day. He had 9 catches for 94 yards and 2 touchdowns. And he seemingly found his way on the outside against the Broncos in the flats and also across the middle of the field. They did a really good job attacking the Broncos defense. And now it's like, okay, you lose this embarrassingly to a very, the Rams aren't a very good football team. Granted, the Broncos aren't either. But you lose like this to the Rams. Now you have a matchup coming up this upcoming Sunday against Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs at Arrowhead Stadium. It's going to get worse before it gets better, right? And it's at this point, we are all wishing we just hit sim to the end of the season. Let's get to the offseason. Let's see what changes the Broncos have in store. Let's see what the Walton Penner family ownership group has in store in terms of the decisions that they want to make for this team. But at this point, Sayre, with 2 games left, you and I have talked about this. Is it worth playing Russell Wilson these final 2 games? Like, what is there to gain for Denver? And granted, you have a lot of guys on this team that love football. They're playing for pride. They love their job. And unfortunately, this year has not gone how many of them have expected. But at one point, when do you step in and say, you know what? We have to also focus on next season. We have to protect, guys that we have planning, being here next year. To me, I think that's an interesting wrinkle to consider going forward. And I think one thing as well is, what are some silver linings, right? There's not many with this team, but there is one player who I think has showcased 3 consecutive weeks in a row, maybe even 4, that he is the top option for the Broncos at the wide receiver position. But also with Courtland Sutton returning, Jerry Jeudy and Courtland, they complement each other very well when they move around. How did the Broncos do that in Sunday's embarrassing loss to the Los Angeles Rams? We'll dive into that on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at NHTSA, and you're hanging out with some friends, putting back a few drinks, and a few becomes too many. As the evening comes to an end and people start to head out, you think of calling for a ride. Nah, you live nearby, you can make it home, it's no big deal. What are the odds you'll get pulled over anyway? And even so, what's the worst that could happen? Your insurance goes up, you lose your license, you lose your job, you total your car, you kill someone. Everyone knows about the risks of driving drunk, and the results are tragic and often deadly. However, that still doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel while under the influence. That's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again. Play it safe and plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. Drive sober or get pulled over. Not many silver linings for this Broncos season outside of a couple of players who have seemingly showcased their value to this team going forward. One of them on the offensive side of the ball being Jerry Jeudy, the one bright spot in Sunday's embarrassing loss to the Los Angeles Rams. Sayre, I feel like a broken record at this point, right? Because you and I have been on this podcast, I think since the season began, even in the offseason, saying, okay, hey, you know what? Jerry Jeudy has a chance to explode in this offense. Now, granted, the offense has been horrific. Jerry's been a bright spot. And we continue to see, right? Data always tells us, okay, let's see more. Let's see more of the same thing. What's the hypothesis? When the Broncos target Jerry Jeudy, good things tend to happen. Okay, you test the hypothesis. So far, I mean, for 4 straight weeks, we've seen that. It has paid dividends. Jerry Jeudy had a big game in this game here, but I think that my biggest gripe, and I hate to, start off looking at something that we view as a positive in a negative light, the Broncos offense last week against the Cardinals, they opened up the game and they went after Jerry Jeudy from the onset. The first 2 plays of the game, target to Jerry Jeudy, target to Jerry Jeudy. This game against the Rams, he didn't see a single target for the first 2 series. And what happened on those first 2 series? Interception, interception. Jeudy responded in a big way and gave the Broncos some life, being down 17-0 at a 23-yard catch and run. And Sayre, to be honest with you, he had a very scary moment. I don't know if you saw the replay. He got rolled up on that first down catch where he ran for 23 yards, and it looked like his leg and ankle hyperextended and buckled, getting rolled up on once again, and he immediately came off limping. And I was like, at that point, okay, man, that's a brutal replay. Like, Jerry, that looked like that really hurt. We may not see him. Dude toughed it out and he kept playing. To be honest with you, the replay made it seem like he shouldn't have came back and played, but it didn't slow him down one bit because he finished this game 6 catches for 117 yards and a couple of big plays downfield. In my opinion, Sayre, this is something I think we can view as a silver lining, right? Because, okay, not everything has to be negative, right? We already know the Broncos season has been miserable. There's been a lot of things that haven't gone right, but there are good things that we can look to the future. And I think Jerry Jeudy is a building block to the future of the Broncos, regardless of who is at quarterback and what they decide to do.
I would say, Cody, right at this point in time, and no disrespect meant to anyone else on the team, but I would say Pat Surtain and then Jerry Jeudy as the best players on this team. And you can see that week in and week out. Jerry Jeudy is making plays. He's given opportunities and he makes the most of them. I mean, he's the only guy out there for the offense right now that I think there was a time when you kind of held your breath. The ball was going his direction, but that was years ago at this point. That was his rookie season in the NFL. Now we're kind of upset when the ball's not going his direction, aren't we? We're kind of hoping that the ball goes to Jerry Jeudy almost every single time Russell Wilson or Brett Rippon drops back to pass. Because why? Because we know that he's making tough contested catches. He's making plays after the catch. He's showing some incredible, just like, I don't know what you want to call it. It's almost like basketball-like moves when he's out in the open field. He's juking guys. He's kind of using the little Michael Jordan push off Byron Russell out there. I saw him do that against the LA Rams in this one. So, I mean, he's out there doing so many different things with the ball in his hands as a route runner, doing a great job of being a hands catcher, not letting the ball come into his body. He's growing so much before our eyes. I think that Jerry Jeudy, I know we've talked about him a lot these last few weeks, but he deserves it. I mean, he deserves credit for having a really big bounce back after the injury that he suffered early this year. And you're right. When I saw that replay, which, I mean, sarcastically, thank you, CBS, for showing that replay like 4 or 5 times as slow as possible to just make sure we could see how far his ankle was bending. I mean, my goodness, it was tough to watch, but I'm glad he came back into the game. I was glad to see him bounce back and not only come back into the game, but actually make a bunch of plays after that. So Jerry Jeudy, man, he has been a bright spot for this Broncos team. I know, like you said, it's silver linings amidst a, really, really dark time in Broncos country. But Jerry Jeudy is somebody that the Broncos have to find a way to build around. The fear at this point is, Cody, is he playing so well that he becomes their most valuable trade asset in an offseason? I don't even want to start thinking that way. I think you have to keep Jerry Jeudy in the fold. But, man, I'm sure teams are going to be looking at the Broncos situation without a second-round pick, without, a late first-round pick, and they're probably going to be saying, hey, what would you want for Jerry Jeudy there? I bet you those rumors will be ramping up over the course of the offseason. Hopefully the Broncos stay put and don't deal him to anybody.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, you have to look at every option. And I will say this, too, like for Jerry, I'm a firm believer he can be a very prominent playmaker for this Broncos team. Now, I got some Twitter responses after this game because I said the only positive takeaway from today's game is that Jerry Jeudy is that dude still. And this one guy said, no, he's not. He doesn't have a single play during which he ripped the ball from a defender, greased the guy after the catch, or clearly wanted him more than the other guy. He's just another athlete, blessed at birth. He's very easily replaced starting the 5th round of every draft. Sayre, I'll tell you this. There's a trend. A lot of these people, some of these Broncos fans absolutely dislike Jerry Jeudy. I don't understand why. The number one thing I get, and I got another response from a guy as well that said, all he does is complain to the refs and he acts like a child. They need to ship him out of town. For what I see, like Jerry Jeudy is a passionate dude, a very passionate dude. And Sayre, at times I feel like he's one of the only guys that's out there on the field, at least what we see, like being there in person at games or, if you're watching on TV, seems like he's the only guy that has a fire lit underneath him a little bit. And it's like, is that a bad thing? To me, I think that there's a lot of hypocrisy when it comes to how certain people view Jerry Jeudy. I think a lot of people have this very negative connotation towards him, which I think is very unfair, by the way.
I completely agree, Cody. Yeah, I couldn't say it better. I really wish that people weren't talking that way about one of the Broncos' best players. I mean, it's unfortunate. You're always going to have that kind of negativity out there, I guess. But man, it's a shame that, I fear that Broncos players eventually, people that, are people first and foremost, they're just not going to want to play for the Denver Broncos. I mean, this is a fan base that has become sort of notorious for kind of running guys out of the building. And not that that's actually happening, but man, I can't help but wonder how much did that play into Melvin Gordon, with his struggles on the field, just knowing how hated he was by the fan base for 3 straight years. Like nobody, and I say nobody, it's not nobody, but a lot of people in Broncos country really didn't embrace him, and it ended up being kind of just this negative vibe towards him that I think, maybe could have ended up impacting his on-field play. Obviously with Jerry Jeudy, he's kind of going the opposite direction, right? He's kind of swimming up the stream. There's a lot of people that want to talk about his passion in a negative light. I don't see it that way. What about Courtland Sutton, slamming his hands trying to get the ball from Russell Wilson as Russell passed on that opportunity to run? He could have also thrown it to Courtland there, by the way. He missed that opportunity as well. So I think that there's so many different things. Dalton Reisner, how about that? You get the thing with him and Brett Rippon on the sideline where he's pushing Brett Rippon away because Rippon is like, you got to pick up the quarterback. And I mean, right now, Cody, things are so bad in Broncos country. It's extending to everybody. And winning is the cure-all, right? Everybody's loving Jerry Jeudy if the team is winning. Everybody's loving Russell Wilson if the team's winning. I mean, that's just the way that things are. But when you're losing, you have these people that come out. I believe they call them internet trolls, Cody, where they come out from the depths and the darkness, and they try to, grab your ankles as you're crossing the bridge. And it's just – why? I don't understand that mentality. You know what? I think you and I and a lot of the listeners of Locked On Broncos, a lot of people in Broncos country are starting to and have been really embracing Jerry Jeudy. I think it's time to start embracing him as one of the team's best players because the Broncos, they're lucky to have him right now. He's the only source of offense on this team at the moment.
Yeah, and I will say too, kind of an honorable mention, Courtland Sutton. A guy who we've had, I think, a lot of criticism towards this year about, if he's the number one guy, he's got to put a lot on his shoulders. He's got to step up and make some of these plays that we've been accustomed to seeing. I will say, I felt like the Broncos moving both Jerry and Courtland around in this game, while obviously the results of the offensive side weren't good, these two guys seem to complement each other really well in that type of role there, rather than just being established as, okay, Courtland's the X, Jerry's going to be the Z, so on and so forth, or the slot guy. They're mixing and moving them around. Obviously, Courtland had a little bit of a solid day as well for the Broncos coming off the hamstring injury. So, these two guys, battling their tails off there. There's some other guys. Obviously, it's not everybody's not just hanging their heads and saying, okay, hey, we're defeated. There were a lot of guys still battling, Sayre. Unfortunately, the loss is one of the most embarrassing in Broncos country history, and it has fans on the edge right now. And there's a lot of toxicity on social media. We get a lot of toxicity in our comment section. I mean, it happens. And as you mentioned, winning cures all. But feels like at this point, the Broncos are a far trek, like we talk about, like the Lord of the Rings, the trek to, Middle Earth to try to destroy the ring, whatever it may be. Feels like the Broncos are on a journey longer than that at this point. And I'm not sure when the wins will come because there's just a multitude of things that are wrong with this football team right now. And I'm sure we're going to pinpoint a little bit more this week. But now we are officially on Hackett watch after this performance. Could the Broncos move on from Nathaniel Hackett this week as early as Monday? Stay tuned here, Lockdown Broncos. For more, you can check out my written work, milehighsports.com, Sayre's work, predominantly orange.com as well. We'll have you covered here every step of the way as the Broncos will now have to prepare for the Kansas City Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes on the road in an AFC West showdown. Thank you so much for tuning in to Lockdown Broncos here today. We appreciate you so much. We'll see you tomorrow for a brand new episode of the show.